for science!
Hey, what's going on, guys? Willie Dills here, and I am here today to talk about the brand new balance changes announced today by Team 5 in Hearthstone. Now, if you notice, most of the changes were made to the cards in the Evergreen set, which is, of course, the basic and classic cards. These are cards that will not be rotating out of standard, basically ever. So I like that they decided to move forward with mostly changes there. And the changes that they made to non-Evergreen cards are cards that are a little ways away from rotating out in most cases, as with Yogg and Call of the Wild. However, they did make a change to one of the cards that I think most of the community has had a big problem with in Tuskar Totemic. We're going to go through all of the changes, and at the end I'll kind of summarize what I think about this in general. First, I just want to say I'm really happy to see some changes being made. We have talked about this a lot on the show, The Angry Chicken, and one of the reasons that I like to see these kind of changes happen is I would periodically like to see cards just brought in line when they become a problem. I think that Hearthstone historically has not taken advantage of the fact that they are a digital card game and can periodically make some changes to cards that exist in the game. The other cool thing about it is that they are making small changes, incremental changes, rather than in the past when they basically made sweeping changes that killed cards, essentially. Think of the Starving Buzzard or Warsong Commander, right? These cards were nerfed into the ground to the point that we just don't see them anymore. And I think that's a little bit of a shame. So I prefer them making small changes, changes that may allow those cards to still get played in certain instances and certain decks, while still making sure that no card is oppressive, that no class has only one way to play the class. These are the types of changes I really want to see continuing to happen. And I was happy about the announcement today, and I'll talk about each one of these changes as we go through. So the first change that was made is Rockbiter Weapon. So Rockbiter Weapon is originally a 1-mana card, and it's give a friendly character +3 attack this turn. So that means you can put it on one of your own minions, or you can put it on your own face, and you can deal 3 damage. You can also add, it's additive, so you can add it to an existing amount of attack. So let's say you have a minion with 2 attack, you put Rockbiter Weapon on that minion, it now has 5 attack. So what they did is they changed it from 1 mana to 2 mana. So the card text is all the same. Now this may seem to some people like they nerfed the wrong card, because I think a lot of people look at Doomhammer and think that that's the problem. Doomhammer is actually fine on its own. You pay 7 mana with the 5 mana original cost and 2 mana overload, and you get 16 damage spread out over 4 turns. And that in and of itself is not OP. But Rockbiter was a card that was, first of all, really, really good early on as a removal spell, and also allowed you to make late game burst really, really possible with the Doomhammer in combination with it. So essentially this card was super versatile, and you could use it as both early game removal and to allow that burst with Doomhammer later on. So what this does is it allows cards like Doomhammer to exist, which is a very cool card. It's really iconic to the Shaman class. And Rockbiter on its own is kind of just a boring card. And I can see that this change may look a little bit funky when you compare it to, say, Quick Shot, where you do the 2 mana, or you do the 3 damage for 2 mana, but you don't take the damage yourself, right? But the problem is that in Shaman, for instance, they had Doomhammer, right? So a card like this kind of becomes a problem. And I don't think that this card is now bad. I think this card is actually still an okay card. It's just going to make those burst combos happen a little bit later. It's going to give the opposing player a little bit more time to counterplay once the Doomhammer comes out. So I think this change is totally fine. I'm on board. Now let's talk about Tuskar Totemic, which is another Shaman card. Tuskar Totemic, a 3-mana 3/2 with a battlecry, summon any random totem. Now that means you can summon Totem Golem, which qualifies as a totem. You can summon Flame Tongue Totem. You can summon Manatide Totem. And the 4 basic totems were also part of what could be summoned in Standard. What they've changed the card to now is 3-mana 3/2 battlecry, summon a random basic totem. So this will only summon one of the 4 totems that you can get off of your hero power. Now, I like this change a lot. I think this is a change I really wanted to see. The card still provides decent value for its cost in that it gives you a 2-mana card plus a 2-mana ability, which is summoning a random basic totem. So you're still kind of getting a discount, and you're putting it into 1 card. And in a very specific type of deck, which is essentially the Totem Shaman, the deck that wants to play a lot of totems and allow things like Thing from Below to become cheaper, allow things like Primal Fusion to work to buff totems, and also to be able to buff totems through other means later in the game, but just relying on being able to get lots of totems out on the board, this card is still going to be okay in those decks. But you will never now see the random win on, say, turn 2 with the coin or turn 3 without the coin when you play Tuskar Totemic and just get a Totem Golem. Sometimes that was such a swing that you could never come back. You could never get the tempo back that Shaman gained because of a random effect. And I think that was really the problem with Tuskar Totemic, is that sometimes it just outright won a game really early on before the opponent had a chance to respond. So I really like this change. I think this is a good one. Okay, let's talk about Call of the Wild. Call of the Wild is the 8-mana hunter spell. Summon all 3 animal companions. So that means you summon Huffer, Leok, and Misha. And each of these guys is worth more than 3 mana on their own, but because of the random effect and sometimes it being the wrong one, the one that you didn't want, the card Animal Companion on its own is okay. The problem with Call of the Wild is that it would summon all 3 together, so there was no random element anymore. And I would say each of those cards on their own is worth 3.5 mana, so when you can guarantee you get all of them together and they synergize with each other, you're getting about 10.5 mana worth of card for 8 mana, which is, I think, too much of a discount. At 9 mana now, the card is still very, very good, but it's going to come out a turn later, and that means it's going to allow people to play against Hunter without having to worry about this kind of instant win card coming out on turn 8. They'll have to coin it on turn 8 now, and I think 9 mana is a little bit more in line with what it should cost. You will still see this card in Hunters, but now this will be a choice. Do I run only one of these? Probably you'll still see people run 2. But you might start to see things like Aggro Hunter come back, because it's at this point, with the power level of Call of the Wild, you were kind of only seeing mid-range Hunter because they knew that they were able to play more of a mid-range style and still win the game because of the closing power of Call of the Wild at 8 mana. So I don't think we're going to see this card go away. I think it's just now more in line with what it's supposed to have cost in the first place. Next, we have Execute. Execute is a 1 mana spell for warriors. It reads, destroy a damaged enemy minion. Now that card will cost 2 mana. So you might be saying, hey, what the hell, man? Execute was fine. And yeah, and it was fine. I don't think Execute was necessarily an oppressive card. But at 2 mana, I think it's also fine. So in Control Warrior, you float a lot of mana throughout a game. And a lot of times having it be 1 mana was really kind of negligible as far as the cost was concerned. But I think that the reason why this card deserved to be altered a little bit is because in a deck like Dragon Warrior, Tempo Warrior, the 1 mana destroy a minion was just really, really strong when you could also pair it with strong mid-range creatures. So you could remove a creature and develop creatures in the same exact turn for very cheap. And the card was just, I think, a little bit too efficient. When Warrior was basically only the control variant, this card never seemed to be a problem. But now that Warrior has 5, 6 archetypes that are actually all pretty good, 1 mana Execute is a little over the top. And I don't think that this card's going away, but now it'll be a choice. When you're playing a Dragon Warrior or a Tempo Warrior, you will now have to decide, is a 2 mana Execute worth it to be in my deck? And Control Warrior is still going to play this card, no matter what. So I think this card is fine. This card's not going away. And I think if you're a Warrior player, you can relax. This card will still be good for you. It'll still be in a lot of Warrior decks. It's going to be totally okay. This is just, I think, bringing it in line a little bit with, say, a card like Shatter, right? Where Shatter is 2 mana kill a frozen minion. This was 1 mana kill a damaged minion, which is something that's very easy for Warriors to do. So, you know, in the current state of Hearthstone, I think 1 mana Execute was maybe a little bit too powerful, and this is totally okay. And again, this is a small change. It's not going to kill this card at all. Next, we have Charge. Charge was a 3 mana spell that said give a friendly minion +2 attack and charge. Now they've changed it to be a 1 mana card, give a friendly minion charge. It can't attack heroes this turn. So this is going to kill OTK Warrior, at least the current version of OTK Warrior that runs either Raging Worgen, or maybe they're running Arcane Giants and then giving them charge, which made them 10/8s, and then also Faceless manipulating them so that you had 2 of them. Things like that. And OTK Warrior, the Worgen form of that, was able to do things like 60 damage in a turn, which is, yeah, it's a little strong. Now, I like there being big burst combos, but I also like those combos to be reined in a little bit. I would like to see them never be able to do 60 damage, for instance. I think somewhere under 30 is a good spot to be, Because if you can keep those OTK combos to slightly under 30, it means that the opponent still has to do some damage throughout the course of the game. This gives some counterplay to the opponent because a card that did, or a combination that did 60 damage, there's no way to play around that. Even as another warrior, you can't build up enough armor. So the only real counterplay was to time a taunt just perfectly. However, in the OTK Raging Worgen version of Warrior, a lot of times the taunt didn't matter because of that 1-mana execute, right? They could just get that taunt right out of the way and go ahead and get through for their damage. The other problem is that the deck that the OTK Warrior went into was just such a... It had so many draw engines in it that it was almost impossible to not let them draw into this combo. So even though the combo has a lot of cards in it, it's really easy to draw into it because there are so many ways to draw cards efficiently in Warrior. I don't think that this card will see play at all anymore. You could maybe say Control Warrior might find a way to utilize it, because now maybe you could play Sylvanas on turn 6, charge your Sylvanas into something else, and use it as essentially removal. However, I really don't think that Warrior, with the efficient removal options they already have, will find a spot for charge. So I do think charge is just a dead card now, which is something that I think Blizzard has been trying to do for a while. It's just kind of limit charge's potential, get rid of charge minions that are a little strong. So now you've got like Leroy Jenkins as your charging finishing card, and you still got ways to utilize that. So I think this card is fine to be taken away, fine to be put into a state that is essentially a dead card. You know, I mentioned early on in the video that they didn't really nerf things into the ground. This would be, I think, the one case where this card got basically nerfed into the ground. But this card was problematic in a lot of ways, and it limits design space. It's a card that just creates situations that are bad because it's impossible to play around as the opponent, right? And I think that's really the key here. You want counterplay. You want the opponent to be able to line things up to try to prevent the plan once they've identified what your plan is. And charge in its current state, especially with Emperor Thaurissan ticks, was just a situation you could not play around. So while it might be dead, I say whatever. I'm good with it. Okay, next let's talk about Abusive Sergeant. Abusive Sergeant used to be a 1-mana 2/1 with a battle cry that read, give a minion +2 attack this turn. Well, now they've nerfed it to be a 1-mana 1/1. So all they've done is take away 1 attack and has the exact same battle cry, give a minion +2 attack this turn. So for 1 mana, no real drawback. Abusive was applying a bit too much in stats to the board. And it was also fine to just play it on turn 1 without the battle cry value. It never really felt like a huge culprit as far as power was concerned. This didn't necessarily feel like an overpowered card. But at the 1/1 stat line, it'll still be used in minion-heavy decks like Zoo to be able to trade up and create situations where you can utilize a bunch of small minions. But you will no longer see it as just your opener as a 1-drop, and that's fine. And also, it's going to bring, I think, aggro, which Blizzard has stated was maybe a little too strong, going to bring aggro a little bit more in line, similar to when they made the change to Leper Gnome, making it a 1/1. So you're not going to see it as often, but you will still see this in decks like Zoo. You just won't see it as often in decks that are just trying to kill you as fast as possible. The old version of Abusive Sergeant gave you 4/1 in stats for 1 mana. Now this is going to give you 3/1 in stats for 1 mana. And I think that's totally fine. So I predict the card will still be played, but it'll definitely bring aggro a little bit more into line. And it'll force people to make some deck building choices rather than just dropping 2 of these into every aggro or minion heavy deck. And now let's talk about the big one. This is the Yogg Saron Hopes End nerf that I think a lot of people have been hoping for a long time. So as predicted, the Yogg change is here. But rather than just move it into Wild or nerf it in some other way, they went with an option that some, including myself, had already predicted and suggested. Let me go ahead and just clarify what the change is, because it looks like the card is exactly the same. The card works in exactly the same way. However, if the card bounces itself back into your hand, or otherwise kills itself or transforms itself, the spell casting immediately stops. So this means that in in a lot of situations currently, you'd play Yogg, and let's say it would cast Twisting Nether, and it would remove itself from the board, and yet the spells would continue to happen. You'd maybe draw a whole bunch of cards. Maybe you'd do something like play a Call of the Wild. You would just still cast a whole bunch of spells, and more often than not, those spells were helpful to you. Now, Yogg Saron, this keeps it more in line with what it kind of already did in certain situations, like, say, getting stolen by Sylvanas. It would now start casting spells for the opponent. It was a little inconsistent that it would die and continue to cast spells. So now it stops casting spells as soon as it dies, gets polymorphed, or gets bounced back to your hand. So what this is going to do, this is going to mean that Yogg is just no longer going to be played in competitive mode. Tournaments, high ladder, you're just not going to see Yogg anymore. With that drawback, the fact that it kills itself and stops casting, it's going to be a much less powerful card. And I think you're going to see people move away from Yogg pretty much completely in competitive play. But that being said, it's still going to be a really fun card if you're just out to have a good time. If all you care about is making a crazy deck that does crazy things, Yogg is still crazy. So you're still going to have a blast being able to play this card if that's really what you want. So I think this is okay. I would have also been okay with them just moving the card to Wild, where there really isn't a lot of competitive play. The competitive play is a little bit more based around having a fun deck and doing things that are interesting and things you can't do in Standard. That would have been okay too, but I'm fine with this change. The other thing that's interesting is you might see this card still being played somewhat on the ladder, but rather than cast, 10 to 15 spells to power up your Yogg, you might actually want to play it more with, like, say, 5 to 8 spells. Then it has a less likely chance to kill itself, but it will still probably do some cool stuff, right? But what they basically done is they move this card now squarely into the fun deck category. So it's going to be along the lines of, say, like a Major Domo Executus, Elite Tauren Chieftain, Mimiron's Head. These cards were never cards that were found in competitive decks and in tournament play, but you could still try to make a fun deck out of them and have a good time and try to meme your opponents if you wanted to. And I think that's probably where the card actually ultimately belongs. So I like this change too. I think this will be totally fine, and I'm excited to see how tournament play goes forward when we can no longer sit and bitch about Yogg-Saron. All right, so let's summarize these changes. It's very clear that Team 5 has now changed their position, or at least adjusted their position on card balance, and they're paying attention to the community. They used to kind of really firmly stand on this belief that we shouldn't be changing cards. We should allow the community and the meta to sort itself out rather than come in and make changes to cards that some people might complain about. If we do that, then there's nobody trying to figure out how to counteract those cards. However, I think that you can kind of have the best of both worlds, where you make these small changes when they are required to be made, when it will make the metagame more healthy. You have the option to do it. You're not pigeonholing yourself and saying, no, our stance is to never make changes. I think it's kind of dumb to force yourself to only do things one way, when that way may not be correct. It's much better to be open-minded as a game development company. And I think this is really, really smart on Team 5's part to go ahead and just say, hey, listen, yes, some of these cards deserve to be changed a little bit, especially now that we know we have an evergreen set that's always going to be here. If some of those cards are problematic, they're always problematic, right? And as new cards come in, sometimes those cards become more problematic. And so in those situations, it's better to go in and just be willing to try things, be willing to make adjustments. And I really, really like that. I hope that Team 5 does not stop doing what they're doing in this particular. This is great. I love the original changes they made when Standard was introduced. And I think these are all really fantastic changes here as well. So I'm happy. I applaud the changes, Blizzard. Please keep it up. Now, how about tournament mode? If you give me that, I will kiss your asses forever. Okay? Yeah? You hear me? You hear what I'm saying? We're all saying it. All right, anyway. That's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please leave your comments below on what you thought of the changes. If you thought any of them were too far, not far enough. Were there any cards they left out? Were there any cards that you're really sad or happy about these changes? Did you really love them? Did you really hate them? I just want to hear what you guys have to say. So please leave your comments below on this video. Hit the thumbs up button if you like this kind of content. I definitely want to be doing more stuff like this. And also remember to subscribe to the channel if you like the content you see here. Also, if you want to support this type of content being made, patreon.com/WillyDills is the way to do that. Also, check out my Twitch streams, twitch.tv/WillyDillsSF. And of course, check out the podcast that I do, The Angry Chicken and The Instance. All right, that's going to do it for me. See you guys next time. I love you. Have a great day. And good job, Team 5.